whole lot on trade and those kinds.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and European leaders today have called the EU-India partnership historic, as both sides have signed the biggest free trade agreement in their history. Modi has said two of the world's largest democracies have come together, boosting people-to-people ties and opening European markets for Indian farmers, workers, students and professionals. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has called it the mother of all the deals, saying it will create jobs, strengthen manufacturing and deliver security in an unstable world. Both sides have announced deeper cooperation on defense, maritime security, clean energy, technology and climate action, calling the partnership a blueprint for global stability and a new chapter in India-EU relations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ben Aris. He's a former Moscow bureau chief of the Daily Telegraph, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for joining us. Now, looking at this, what's the significance of the timing and also of this deal, and what are the expected gains from this free trade agreement for both sides?
Well, it'll boost trade, and for India that's very important. It needs new markets, it needs to earn more hard currency from trading with the rest of the world. If it earns insufficient, it runs a big trade deficit with China and Russia in particular, that runs to some $130 billion. However, with Europe, it runs a trade surplus of around $10 billion, and they're looking to grow that in order to offset this trade deficit. So that's the sort of economic, practical things. The more basic, it should also supercharge India's industrial development. The beauty of trade is that you receive quality goods from somewhere like Europe, and once the volume of that rises, eventually the European companies will set up local production, so-called foreign direct investment, and that's extremely valuable because that comes with technology transfer, that comes with training for the people, the locals that work in those factories, and then that will help India develop, because at the end of the day, it's still fairly basic economy. It needs to make things that other countries want. This is one of the reasons why it has such a big deficit with China and Russia. It hasn't got enough things that it can sell those countries that they want. So all in all, it's fairly historic. And the final thing I'll say on the timing is, look, the world has been turned upside down by the advent of Trump, and von der Leyen specifically mentioned in her speech that trade has been, quote unquote, weaponized. And by that, she's referring to Trump's aggressive policies by imposing tariffs for political ends. India has been hit by a 50% tariff for buying Russian oil. And as a result of that, everybody, Europe included, which has also suffered from a 15% Trump tariff, is looking to diversify their trade relations. So the timing of this is significant because of that. And in parallel, there's an equally large and important deal that the EU is doing with Mercosur, the collection of South American countries. So you can see it's all going in the same direction. Everyone's trying to get out from underneath the American hammer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for highlighting that. Now we also welcome Ms. Alison Mutler. She's joining us from Bucharest as a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania. Thank you very much, Ms. Mutler, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at the EU and India FTA, how significant is this? And also, what's your take on the fact that, like Mr. Aris highlighted, that von der Leyen directly didn't mention that Trump is weaponizing trade, but she has mentioned indirectly that trade has been weaponized. What's your take?
Well, it's I think it's been said many times, it's a historic deal, and it's very important for both sides, and it is a way to diversify trade. India is a growing market; it's a developing country. It's the world's fourth largest economy. Europe also is a very big market, together with 2 billion people, and so I think the tariffs are, as the previous guest said, the tariffs are a political weapon against countries that Trump feels hasn't fallen, into line, into doing what he wants. So this is a very structurally, this agreement has been reached over, 19 years. It's been very carefully put together. There's nothing political. Well, it is political in a general sense, but there's nothing political about it. It's designed to help both sides, to help both markets to prosper, and it's designed to be mutually beneficial. So it is an alternative to the Trump tariffs, I suppose. It is trying to be, not specifically political, except that it is designing to further trade, to further partnerships between the two sides, and to create an alternative to the US and China.
Thank you very much for highlighting that, Ms. Matler. I would like to also welcome Ms. Joyita Basu for this. Ms. Basu, are you with us right now? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Basu, for joining us. Ms. Basu, can you tell us the significance of this deal, and also what's your take on the fact that, like our earlier guest mentioned and highlighted, that although Trump's name wasn't mentioned directly, von der Leyen did mention that trade or tariffs have been weaponized.
Well, what we are looking at is, I think, a huge swathe of people coming under this trade deal. I mean, people who have not been doing business as much as they should have been doing, the potential that was not realized. I think at one level it has really helped India and EU to strike this deal because of Mr. Trump. The urgency was not there all these days. The reason why it has taken almost 2 decades for this deal to finally materialize. So the very fact that so I think at one level, I think EU and India should thank Mr. Trump that this was, it was because of him that this deal got done. Of course, discussions had been going on for a long time, but something or the other. And what is very important is that, we are looking at, there's going to be a 96.6% reduction, I would say, in tariffs, in 96.6% European goods, and some of them also tariff-free, and India also it is going to be reciprocal. For India, it is particularly important to have its textile sector, gems, jewelry, and these sectors which have taken a beating when it comes to, because India was trading with the US, and what has happened in all these days, in the last 1 year or maybe the last 5, 7, 8 months now, these sectors have been really affected. Although this particular deal with the EU will take another 7, 8 months to actually start functioning. But then, I would say India's core sectors, the human intensive sectors, they are opening up. They are again back in business in a big way. UK, the FTA with UK also really helped these particular sectors. And in terms of technology, I would say that is an area that is going to be very important in terms of the technology that is going to come in from the EU. So that way it is very important. And when we are looking at EU food products, EU alcohol, all these things, they have a huge market in India. Because and that is, and for Indians also, automobiles, everything becomes cheaper. And we know how Indian economy is growing. We know how much purchasing power Indians have. So once they kind of get into this market, it's very beneficial for them.
Thank you for highlighting that. I would like to bring in Mr. Aris for my next question. As you know, Ms. Basu highlighted Trump has created some kind of urgency in many countries, including in EU, in regions like EU, and in countries like India. So how do you think this, although EU and India took 16 summits to come into this agreement. How do you think about their protectionist kind of, their protectionist sense has played into this trade deal that took forever for them to reach?
Well, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
suddenly everything's changed, and the EU has been protectionist. It worries about its own markets. It has extremely high unit costs because of the wages, the European level of wages. And consequently, it's been very cautious about trading with other countries. I think the example here is with cars, that of course Europe makes extremely high quality, famous brands like Audi, Mercedes, Volkswagen. And there's been a 110% tariff on imports of cars in order to protect the local producers in Europe. And part of this deal has been to slash that down to 40%. So that's a big plus for India because it opens up a rich market to relatively cheap, it's cheap cars that it can now sell to Europe. And Europe has changed its attitude to this protectionism because before it was living in a cozy world where it could make lots of money by selling Mercedes cars to the Americans who have the same sort of costs as the Europeans do. And suddenly it's now in fear of losing that market, or at least having extreme tariffs slapped on products like Mercedes. And consequently, it's looking around for partners. And so the whole attitude of protectionism, slow growth, keep your cozy market to yourself has changed. And this is a radical new direction. And Europe is going to take a hit from increased competition. And normally that's a good thing, but the way Europe works is that on the whole, the lobbies that do things like cars are so powerful that they successfully put protectionist regimes on their products to protect their home markets. And they're being told to sacrifice that as a result of these changes. So like I said before in the earlier comment, the whole world has been turned upside down. The whole way that trade works has been completely altered. The whole mindset has been completely altered because Trump has gone from this special relationship partnership with the other countries in the so-called West, or global North if you prefer, to a combative, like everyone's out for themselves, and it's become a dogfight in a pit in that sense. And Europe is now turning to the other big markets, and again, von der Leyen emphasized over and over again, it's a 2 billion people market, but in terms of per capita income, the American market, which is whatever it is, 350, 400 million people, is more valuable market. But she's looking down the road to growth. I think everybody's looking down the road to growth, and that's not a stupid bet at all.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that. We have a breaking news coming in now. India and the European Union have rolled out full details of their historic free trade deal. The EU will cut tariffs to zero on Indian marine and leather products, textiles, apparel, chemicals, plastics, rubber, base metals, gems, and jewelry in phases over 7 years, excluding the auto, steel, and agriculture. India will reduce tariffs to zero on 93% of the EU goods over 10 years. The EU will open 96.8% of tariff lines, India 92.1%. The deal includes uncapped mobility for Indian students, a mobility pact for workers, and a new security and defense agreement. It also offers carbon tax flexibility, talks on higher steel export quotas, and a separate pact to help India cut carbon emissions. Now we welcome Mr. Ajay Dua. He's an economist, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Dua, for joining us. Now, how do you think how significant is this, and how will this be impacting, including the breaking news I've just taken, the details from it? What's your take?
Thank you very much for getting me into this discussion.
Thank you.
I'm very happy that an agreement, an understanding has been formalized after 18 years of negotiations. The process had begun in early 2007 in Finland when the then Prime Minister had signed and they were signed in Helsinki with the European then Council President, who happened to be the Prime Minister of Finland, this negotiation, but for various reasons, it had not progressed. There were red flags on both the sides. Britain was withdrawing from the European Union. That delayed its negotiation process, as well as the fact that Europe started talking very strongly about the carbon tax and the duties on it, and kept the dairy industry, insisted on dairy industry of India being opened. All those things we have passed. The end of conclusion of the negotiations was announced about a few minutes ago by Indian Prime Minister and the European Union Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. And now that some of the details have been released. On the whole, let me just put it in aggregated form. The duties on Indian products into European Union averaged 3.8%, whereas the Indian duties on the European imports averaged 9.4%. So India had to, in order to get to a stage where both sides are exempting as many products as possible we had to come to an understanding. It's been agreed that it will be 92% for India over a 10-year span, because we have to come down from 9.4%, the average duty. For Europe, it is 97% of the items, and over a 7-year period. So that has been done in a very rational manner, so that the impact on the existing products, existing manufacturers, and the other people involved in moving the goods, etc., does not become too severe. Number two, we have agreed to a phased reduction in duties, particularly into India, for instance, with the automobiles, because we were very keen that we must be able to protect our wide engineering good industry dominated by cars and the auto components. It has been agreed that initially only the duty will be brought down from 110% to 40%. That means 70% reduction only, but over 10 years, it will be brought down to 10%. That means gradual. Second, the duty reduction, in order to continue with the kind of protection, some sort of a protection to the Indian industry, it's been limited to 250,000 units only of cars costing above 15,000 euros a piece. That means semi-luxury or luxury cars only are going to get this benefit of reduced duties, not all the cars. It will be brought down then to 10,000 euro cars costing 10,000 euros and above, and finally probably the entire sector. Again, we have excluded from this all the electric vehicle industries. This is going to be applying only to what is called ICE. That means the internal combustion engines of the conventional type, on which this reduction would be effected. However, it has been agreed right away that for certain products like edible oils, like olive, that includes olives, that the certain agriculture processed foods, including chocolates, the duty will be removed, and the Indian customers, because India probably does not make, we don't have olive oil, we don't make chocolates of that order, which will come from the European Union. Those kind of things, straight away, the European Union would bring this down, or India would bring this down to 0% for their product. However, for duties on pharmaceuticals, it's going to be from the existing 13% selectively, some totally exempted, some will be subjected to a small duty. Details are coming out, but on the whole, the Indian government has been very keen to enter into an agreement with such a large bloc as the European Union. Affordability may not be as high as of the United States, but the number is on the side of the European Union as against the 200 or 300 million of the US, We wanted to set off our, we'd been looking for markets for our apparel goods, gems and jewelries, those kind of our marine products. On all those, US was a big market for us. They're having imposed this high tariff of 50%. We are very happy that the European Union has, we have agreed, come to an understanding about 0% duty on these products from India going in there. The caveat is that it will not come into effect immediately. It comes into effect after all the 27 countries parliaments have ratified it. However, that could take well over a year, but it has been provided for that early application after a few months. The European Union might suggest to the countries where the ratification process is taking time. And I'm glad that along with this, if the US, if there's no duty barrier acting as a barrier for location, and India's per capita income increasing the affordability of its 1.4 billion people, then European nations would probably start investing in India to produce the products here, which will be good for Indian labor, Indian market, as well as the prices. Though we have also come to an agreement on mobility of Indians into the European Union. It might be students, it might be short-term immigration, but workers of different categories, etc. So on the whole, very good agreement. It will fill up a hole which the United States has created. And along with that we have signed a security and defense agreement as well, partnership, particularly that will help our manufacturing, which is already significant in India starting, but with collaborations from the manufacturers of aircrafts and submarines, etc. We've started work on those in India. That should also gather pace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dua, for sharing that insight. We have another breaking news coming in. Germany now has welcomed the landmark EU-India trade deal, saying it opens fresh opportunities for growth on both sides. German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil has said that the agreement will support economic expansion and create good jobs in Europe and India. He has added that the deal also strengthens the European Union's strategic partnership with India, calling it deeper engagement with the world's largest democracy after nearly 2 decades of negotiations. Now we welcome Ms. Miltali Nikore. She's an economist, joins us live from New Delhi for this discussion. Thank you very much, Ms. Nikore, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, as it has been highlighted that it took 16 summits between India and EU to come to this. Can you tell us the significance of this? And also, how do you think the fact that, both India as well as EU markets they are kind of protectionist about their market, how do you think that played out in them coming into this agreement?
No, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I think, when we look at this entire trade agreement, why is it historic? I know it took 16 summits, but actually that is very, very fast when it comes to the world of trade agreements. Because if we look at the EU-Latin America trade agreement that has been agreed now, it took them almost 20 years and countless, summits to actually bring this agreement to the front and to actually, agree on the specifics. So I think our negotiation has been much faster and amongst the fastest in the world of trade agreements. That's the first. The second is that, look at the size of the market that's getting created. That's nearly 2 billion people, a fourth of humanity coming together in a sense, to create this market. And it's not only about the number of people, it's also about the potential of the Indian market that the EU recognizes. See, today, if we look at the income brackets, there are only maybe, say 10% of Indians who have a comparable purchasing power to, the average European. But in the next decade and in the decade after that, that proportion is going to grow by millions. Today, it might be 100 million Indians. Tomorrow, it will be 200 million Indians. Then it will be 300 million Indians. So just think of the multiplier that a continent like Europe gets in terms of the size of the market, and in terms of the growing purchasing power that India represents, and what investing in India means for European companies in terms of returns, because the European population is not going to increase at that pace, but the Indian population is already that high. So if European companies come and invest in India, in growing India, and co-invest with Indian businesses, we can actually create a market that is not only large in terms of number of people, but also in purchasing power. And this is something that the Europeans have realized, and that's why they're coming here to invest in India, not just to trade with India.
Thank you very much for highlighting that. I'd like to also go to and welcome back Mr. AJ Dua to our discussion. Mr. Dua, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, looking at this, what economic spillover effects could result from this closer security defense ties alongside deeper trade integration, and what risks or adjustments cost might these economies both sides face?
Europe has been a big supplier of defense equipment to us, be it aircrafts or naval hardware, particularly submarines, and also various kinds of artillery guns, etc., have been coming to us for a long time from there. We would continue to this defense partnership and security agreement would formalize greater cooperation between the two countries, because not because we would have a common enemy. I don't think there is any fear of any common enemy having been identified at all, but certainly cyber crimes, terrorism. Those are common to everybody. We've talked about that. We've also talked about in that agreement about marine security. It could be against pirates. It could be countries which behave like pirates. Those are the ways this agreement has been, the partnership agreement has been worked out. I expect that we would see not only greater exchange of intelligence about the security aspects, be it terrorism, cybercrime, marine security, etc., but also in the manufacture of the items. India, anything which may not require the basic research and the development work, but the prototypes have been approved, and it's a question of their production. Probably India would be capable in a position to start manufacturing these in India, and they would probably turn out to be of the same quality as in any of the European countries, but at a cheaper cost, because the advantage of labor, the advantage of technology, we are able to go, digital technology, we've gone far ahead. In its application, we could be found to be competitive as well as competent. Those kind of things you would see would work to the advantage of the two groups, India as one, European Union and others, because that is where the comparative advantages lie, and trade. And I call it investment also as a trading in money, the flow of capital flows. All those things are based on the Ricardian principle or the Adam Smith's principle of comparative advantage, that the comparative, if countries work according to their comparative advantage, size of the cake increases, and it is to the benefit of both the sides. So I expect fair amount of capital to flow in capital flows to start between India and the European Union, both ways. In research and development, prototype making, Indian companies putting their effort, sending manpower there, sending money there. When it comes to multiple or scaling it up, starting production, it happening in India. So the trade agreement would be, trade is in specific goods, these would be specific fields, and the two would go together very well. That is what a short while ago the Indian Prime Minister talked about, the President Costa talked about it, and as well as the Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, she talked about it, saying the two are integrated, and we are happy that the agreements for both are being signed on the same day, and we could see they're coming into effect almost simultaneously, be it after a year or early, or some of the things even getting galvanized in only a few months' time.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. A.J. Dua for joining us today and sharing that insight as an economist, senior economist. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now I would like to welcome back Ms. Mitali Nikore for this discussion. So how might this India-EU security and defense partnership affect the defense spending and industrial cooperation between them?
No, absolutely. I mean, if we look at the size, and there is a fact sheet that has just been released by the EU, and it's showing that we're looking at the overall size of the market to go up from the EU investment stocks currently stand at about 140 billion in 2023, and the EU jobs supported by EU exports to India is nearly 800,000 jobs. So when we look at the industrial expansion, even for the EU, they are actually motivating this discussion from the point of view of increasing the job creation in the EU, from increasing EU's investment into India. And in fact, the machinery exports actually form about $16 billion out of the entire stock of exports that are coming to India. Defense equipment is actually at the second point, and pharmaceuticals and motor vehicles are also a very critical component. Aircrafts are a component. So all of these then feed into the defense sector. And I think the defense cooperation that the EU and India have now embarked on will only increase the size of this market. We're looking at a market size of at least $50 to $60 billion of trade between the two countries in the defense sector alone. And overall, the trade will go up to nearly $350 billion. So I think, really an area of cooperation, defense, as well as industrial production, and machinery and equipment stands very clear amongst them.
With that, I would like to thank Ms. Mitali Nikore for joining us today and sharing that insight as an economist. And I would like to thank all our guests for joining us and sharing that insight on this breaking news. Now, that's all we have time for. Keep watching News6 World for more news updates from around the world.